Hi, this is Scott Hensler with Eric Dollard, and we're in his lab in a location in Nevada, and we're going to be doing an interview on what he's working on and what he's willing to share with us. So, Eric, would you like to say hello and tell us about yourself?
Yeah, okay. I don't know exactly what to start with, but at any rate, I'm here. You're going to have to kind of keep the questions going because
Okay.
my mind doesn't start easy. But once you get it going,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we pretty much set an idea of what we're going to be talking about. Now, your lab here that you have in the Nevada desert, you're doing several experiments, and you've got quite a few people involved in volunteering and the equipment that you have. And so one of the things that you've really been pushing here is the advanced seismic warning system, the long wire. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, that's the earthquakes are an electrical phenomenon, and that was generally understood back in the telegraph days when they used to get all these interference into the grounded telegraph systems. So I basically have picked up on that and use the remains of abandoned phone lines and telegraph lines to pick these signals up out of the earth, and then over a few decades of analyzing this, it's an excellent earthquake precursor measuring system. So that's some kind of trying to take that beyond the experimental level into engineering level right now.
Okay, we were also talking about that there were some caves here, and you had some sensors in there. Is that some?
Yeah, I inherited the seismograph monitoring facility of the university. It was analog, and they decided they didn't want it anymore. And it's a horizontal shaft mine, and it goes into solid rock mountain. And there's a 3-axis seismic transducing system in there with rather remarkable magnets and coils for picking this stuff up. And then I have designed a modulator and amplifier to amplify the output of those transducers 1 million times, which is something that is never done.
Was it also part of the nuclear testing monitoring for the Soviets and even for the areas south?
That's a separate mine close by.
Okay, but same concept.
Yeah, they were thinking of getting involved in the facility or whatever, and possibly later. I don't know. We're not interacting on that right now, but I know that there's interest in sharing information in that.
Okay. Well, with that, we were talking about electricity, and that some of the theories, or from the 1900s, they've gotten away from the basic theories that were already established in the 1800s. And you were talking about ether. Can you give us an idea what electricity really is, or what your beliefs are?
Well, electricity is kind of an unknowable, but it's attributed to a phenomenon or a substance, so to speak, called the ether, which is the primordial medium of creation. And when you polarize that, then you can get matter, electricity, any number of things. So electricity is a particular polarization of the ether. It's kind of a fluid dynamic type of situation in a highly rarefied gas. The gas is made out of atoms that are smaller than hydrogen, called Mendeleev atoms. And when this is polarized, then that creates the substance of electricity, and that's why electricity a long time ago was always referred to as juice. That term's long disappeared, but before World War II, the ether concept of electricity was very well established, and the slang for it was juice, because it was considered a fluidic ether type of phenomenon. And then the physicists and the relativists and all of them did everything they could to strip that understanding away from electrical engineering, and presently, because of that, there's no more electrical science. It's gone, it's dead and gone.
Well, I can remember when I first went into the basics of electricity, electronics, They used to tell us that voltage was pressure and current was flow. Is that still a principle?
It can kind of be looked at like that, but those are real rough analogies. They could get you in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
There's two voltages and there's two currents,
Okay.
and that's the complication. One voltage is called electrostatic potential, and it's actually not a pressure, it's a tension. And the other one's called electromotive force,
Okay.
and that's a reaction of magnetism fighting a change.
Like a motor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's current. There's two types of current. There's what's called conduction current, and that involves the movement of the corpuscular material within conductors, wires and things like that. It's called conduction current. The other one's called displacement current. That occurs in space, and that is the electrostatic or dielectric field reacting to any variation. So basically, electromotive force and displacement current are akin to each other, and electromotive force and conduction current are akin to each other.
Okay. But there's still a defined difference between direct current and alternating current.
Well, that's another way of going about it, but any of those four elements are either going to be continuous, which is called direct current, or they're going to be time variant, which is typically alternating current, but also can be impulse current or oscillatory current.
Okay, which would be considered transverse.
No.
Okay, and just an audio
No,
oscillation.
it's only in time.
Only in time.
Transverse is in space. So,
Okay, can you
Yeah.
define that then?
well, when you have these ether lines of force in space, they can be in line with each other, which is called longitudinal, or they could cross each other and then in turn move at right angles to the crossing, and that's called transverse.
Okay.
So that electricity is taught as electromagnetism currently, and that's considered a transverse relationship because magnetism is a transverse relationship.
Okay. So with that, then, if we talk about quantum electrical, like you were talking about J.J. Thomas and
J.J. Thomson.
Thomson.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, each dielectric or magnetic line of force has a specific size, just like an electron has a specific size. So that establishes electricity as to use a modern way of saying it, a quantum phenomena, in that you can't have a continuously varying quantity of it. You're going to have one line, two lines, three lines, four lines, so on up the scale, but you can never have 1.25 lines or 1.33345. That's impossible. It's either got to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
There's no in between.
I see. Okay. So we were talking or asking questions about dark energy, and again, you had referenced back to ether, and again, the alter of the changes that we had in the 1900s. When they're talking about dark energy, are they just simply because they don't understand it? They have no explanation, or are they trying to hide something, or what are they doing?
Well, I don't subscribe to any of that stuff because it's of no use. In the engineering world, none of this stuff's any use. It's all abstractions. It's all become one big abstraction. There's nothing that you can get your hands on anymore. There's nothing that connects to reality. That's why all this, black holes and, and relativity and all these type of things really don't contribute anything to the understanding of electricity or the nature of the cosmos in general. They're just wild abstractions that
Okay.
have become popular.
Okay. So with that, with the cosmos coming into cosmic induction, can you explain that?
Well, I coined the term cosmic induction generator from this configuration of Tesla transformers that I built that caused a galaxy to appear in a burned out streetlight placed between the two fields of the coil. So there's this concept that's floating around called the electric universe. You've probably heard about that. They're a pretty well-established group, and their beliefs are very similar to mine, and they believe that everything has an electrical origin,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's all these, I don't know how they would look at it, but all these lines of force in space are what form the galaxies and the stars and planets and cause things to be alive, and everything comes out of this electrical flux which fills all space, which can build up absolutely unbelievable quantities of magnitude, because the tensions are so high between distant planets, and the area is so large which the field covers, that we're talking about forces that we couldn't even begin to comprehend.
Yeah, and I subscribe to the electrical principle of the galaxy and the Earth itself, just as you were talking about.
So when I saw this galaxy appear in the light bulb, well, then it made sense to me that it's a cosmic induction.
Okay, could you define what you're talking about when you say galaxy, though? So
Well, it was a plasma got started in the bulb, and it took the form of an actual galaxy. There were little stars and suns and the spiral nebula with the body in the middle, and was very dynamic.
Okay, so you had energized a vacuum tube, or
Well,
a
what
street
it
lamp?
is I had 2 Tesla transformers that were out of phase, and they were pointed at each other, so it was kind of like a field generator. So there was this intense electrostatic field between these 2 transformers. So a really severe displacement current was flowing back and forth at about 3 million cycles a second. So then the thing was, is we get these street lights from the back when they had the series street lighting systems, is when they burn out, sometimes because the voltage keeps going up, is they vaporize the inside of the bulb. In other words, the filament and everything gets vaporized, and those are the kind of bulbs we'd look for. And then, because there's no metal in there to interfere with the flux, then we put that in there, and that metal vapor inside the bulb, along with the argon that the bulbs are filled with, which was kind of like the primordial medium, this would always polarize into some kind of organic or cosmic shape. And in the beginning, we did get what, if you looked at it, you would say that's a galaxy. And the bulb exploded under violent pressure, even though it had a partial vacuum inside, because the force of creation was trying to literally escape from the bulb.
The expansion.
And sometimes these entities would just float there in between the 2 transformers without any bulb at all. It maintained its own vacuous boundary.
Now,
I thought that was going to make me the world's most famous person. This plasma containment on such a simple level, and I just got the door slammed right in my face, and that was the end of that, and everything went to the dump.
Now, there was one of the first engineers of TV, one of the tubes that he was working with, you had a chance to go through his equipment.
Oh, Farnsworth.
Farnsworth.
Yeah, I actually held the tubes in my hands and was able to experiment. At that point, nobody had known about these. I was the first one outside of the family and the people that worked with Farnsworth that had ever seen or known about these things. And this was happening at the same time that we were doing the light bulbs. So that's what got the Farnsworth family interested, is here in a high school kid's bedroom, and this kid and myself had modified his bedroom into a laboratory, and RCA supplied all the transformers and coils and everything that we needed, and by some coincidence, that's when I ran across Philo Farnsworth III, the son of the inventor, and his mother, the wife of the inventor, and I invited them to see what we were doing, and they were just completely blown away that with just this simple, crude apparatus, just junk, radio junk, we were doing stuff that normally you'd think you'd need a giant laboratory for.
Right.
So I was adopted by the family immediately,
Yeah.
and given access to all the tubes and knowledge and everything that was available. It's really tragic that Farnsworth didn't write books. It's one of the biggest losses to science that you could ever conceive of. The understanding this person had of the electron and how because it was a capitalistic situation, just like with Tesla, they clam up and they don't write.
Yeah.
Lost all of it.
So you were looking at one of his tubes and you saw something very similar to what you had experienced?
Yeah, it was a creational event
Uh-huh.
at a so-called singularity point inside of a field geometry, and I think I've recounted that story a lot about we were getting drunk together and telling sea stories and whatever, and I told him one of my favorites, and so at any rate he had to come back. He had the counter on that one. He didn't know what to do, so he decided to drag the secret tube box out from underneath his bed. This was the madman's house, with junk everywhere and
Yeah.
what have you, and showed me this tube and snickered. He goes, "You're so smart, you figure this out." And I did. And he made a star inside the tube,
Yeah.
and it was self-sustaining. So I knew I was on the right track.
So with what they do with plasma, is there a relation to it, or is that something completely different?
It's not related to anything that either Farnsworth or myself were working on.
Okay. But you had mentioned Tesla. What would you like to say about Tesla?
Well, Tesla was doing similar things. Tesla's vacuum tube research was producing stunning effects, and that's why I have this international fame, is because, like with this galaxy thing and what have you, I'm the only person that's ever duplicated that. No one's ever been able to duplicate this pressure in the bulb that pushes out, and and then the formation into some kind of boundary condition that's self-sustaining, and Tesla was the only one that ever did that people heard about, and I did it. I duplicated it.
Now, was this also mercury vapor involved, or just
No.
no? Okay. Is it, if you use mercury vapor, does it tend to be more of a weaponite type thing, or?
Well, I wasn't interested in weapons, and
Right.
the Tesla death ray does not work in a way that anybody. Even though it's published, Leland Anderson published a pamphlet on it and describes exactly how it works, and Tesla gives all the basic relationships. No one seems to get it, so it's a Crookes ray. It's a cathode ray type of situation. It works on repulsion, and it's not a vacuum tube.
Okay, and Crookes was the primary inventor of the vacuum tube.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, because the Wardenclyffe Tower, the dismantling of that, what do you think that was really all about? Was that to do with money, or?
Well, it's hard to say. Why they tore it down. Tesla had already lost it at that point. It wasn't of any use to him. There wasn't anything going on there. The underground electrode, which is the most important part, is still there, but now you got one of these historical societies in there, and then once they get in, nobody can do anything. I tried to convince them to build a scale model, and and all I got was a bunch of why we can't, and that's why people in my world have a very low regard for what we call hysterical societies.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want the frog alive. They want it dead in the formaldehyde. Living frog is a threat to them. So
we were talking about when you were with the different companies and the microwave that you were exposed to, all the safety factors and everything that they did to make sure that you didn't look into the feed horn of a microwave and to just verify that you weren't radiated. Today they're primarily doing that with cell towers. They want to do that with 5G. What is your take on all that? What do you think's going on?
I think it's insane. That's the best word for it. It's insane.
Because I can remember my father, when he was on the destroyer escort, that if anyone went in the crow's nest, they would shut the radar down before going up there.
Right.
And now
now the Navy is even tighter about all that. The Navy's going in the other direction. They're tightening up the exposure level situation, so there's more shielding, so you're out there on deck, you're not getting blasted or whatever. I remember when I was in Naval Electronics School, one of the big radars there was sweeping past the barracks, and even with my stereo turned off, it was rectifying in the output transistors and hearing out of the speaker, and I went and told my chief, and they stopped that right away.
Yeah.
They put a keying system on the rotation so that when it swept by the barracks, it went off. Now that's just rampant.
Yeah,
It's absolutely rampant.
cell towers themselves, but now they're talking about 5G and 60 gigahertz, 26, 27 gigahertz, and you were talking about how one time they were in the milliwatts. Now we're talking about watts and
Yeah, Bell System Standards was 250 microwatt exposure. Now we're, I don't know whether to believe it or not, but somebody called me up and said, I heard the most insane thing. And I go, what's that? That they're going to put a 200 watt, 5 gigacycle microwave transmitter in your house so that you don't have to charge your batteries.
Holy smokes.
And I go, no, I don't believe it. And he goes, yeah, that will be it. I don't know the veracity of that statement, but I'm not. It's already starting to get like that. and it's just going to screw everybody up.
Yeah.
Well, if it hasn't already.
Well, you know, we were talking about how I have that higher than 60 cycle that I hear in my mind. It isn't in my ears. Once in a while I'll hear it ringing in my ears, but not like what I normally do. And you were talking about how they're taking the standard three-phase power network going to three individual single-phase. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's called basically a delta to Y conversion. And at one point you could get away with that when the loads didn't generate harmonics, but now the loads are filled with harmonics, and it's causing a massive parasitic power flow in the system at 180 and 540 cycles a second. And it doesn't show up on their switchboard instruments, and its signal's just getting stronger and stronger. And then I don't know who's forcing the utility companies to spend all this money to do this conversion, but on top of that, they're bypassing all the transformers. So all the transients on the high voltage neutral now connect to the customer's neutral. So basically, your whole house is, or residence or factory, whatever, is filled with this stuff. So there's a way. I have an analogy how I describe this that makes it simple to understand. It used to be the purpose of the transformer is to metallically separate the high side from the low side.
Right, an isolation
Yes,
transfer.
isolation. It's a magnetic coupling. It's kind of like a torque converter, you know, going from the engine to the transmission. It's something that keeps them physically separated from each other for obvious reasons.
Yes.
So when you touch your washing machine or your dryer or something that has a ground connection on it, when you touch that piece of metal, well, that ground wire connects to the neutral wire in the circuit breaker box, and the neutral wire connects to the hot wires through the windings of the transformer and the other loads. So you have a metallic mass in your neighborhood of all the wires on the poles, everybody else's grounded appliances, and all that metal in your neighborhood. And when you put your hand on your dryer, you are electrically connected to that extent,
Yes.
which is pretty well neutralized because it doesn't connect to the high side, and there's lots of ground rods around, and it's kept just to one neighborhood. So what they're doing now is they're bypassing the transformers. This was actually something started by the Rural Electrification Administration a long, long time ago. Very bad engineering practice. It's mainly for being used out in the sticks and at a time when there was no harmonics in the power system, because the loads were just motors and incandescent lamps which don't generate harmonics. So now they bypass that. So when you put your hand on your washing machine, you are metallically connected to all the high voltage lines, everything going all the way back to the substation.
Mm-hmm.
So now what they're doing is they're bypassing the transformers at the substation. So in a situation like here in this particular part of Nevada and with this utility company, NV Energy, when you touch the ground terminal on your wall outlet, you are physically held onto the grid. So now what would happen if there was a nuclear MP or a lightning strike or whatever when that happened? Well, you take the bite.
Yeah.
And all your appliances take the bite. And conversely, all this made in China stuff, as a friend of mine used to call it the Trojan horse. And I didn't get it at first, but now I do. Every device that comes here from China has a deliberate jamming element built into it. And it appears to be, for those that look at things from a conspiratorial standpoint, that you metallically connect the power grid together into one giant antenna, and then you sell people interference devices, and it appears to me the objective is to get rid of radio. Get everybody on the internet, get rid of radio. So consequently, I hear people, what's wrong with my AM radio? Why does it buzz all the time now? And that's what I tell them why. Yeah. And when we just got done building this Earth signal receiving system over there by the San Andreas Fault, we were plagued with all these different interferences on the oscilloscopes, and this guy's workshop and residence was filled with violent parasitic oscillations that we couldn't even begin. It's going to take him months to figure out where this stuff's coming from. He's got to turn things off and unplug things, and so we got the opportunity to get a good look at it on the oscilloscope, and this stuff is really peculiar. Mm-hmm. Really peculiar. So he's been requested to get photographs of the oscilloscope images of these things so that I can start to piece this stuff together and then make like a presentation of what these different types of interferences are and where they're coming from.
So we're not just bathed in 60 cycles, we're bathed in all kinds of frequencies, all kinds of parasitic,
Yeah,
all kinds of
yeah,
energy that we normally shouldn't be exposed to. So that then causes health issues, then we have blood
well,
issues.
it also degrades the whole technological infrastructure because everything's starting to interfere with everything else, and because it's all connected together because all the transformers are bypassed, these different things could start locking into each other, and it's quite possible that all of a sudden the whole thing can just choke itself
Yeah.
and just come to a complete standstill. It's also possible for an enemy of our country to transmit some type of signal by some means and get it into the system and cause massive failures of all kinds of electronic devices. There's
It wouldn't hap-
there's very good reason to believe there is a malevolent element behind this.
So they wouldn't just need an EMP, they would just do
It could be custom
Yes.
designed. It could be some kind of digital link into a Walmart and program all of their lighting system to create a certain type of harmonic, because these Walmarts, the harmonics that come out of those things, ends up blowing up substations, and it's bad engineering practices have become standardized in that case to save money, and which worked fine when the lamps were all incandescent, but not now when they're all transient producing devices like these sodium metallic vapor lights produce a lot of harmonics, and then you get these LEDs and they have inverters in them, and those things create other types of interference, and it's just a roar.
Right. So the noise, if you remember the old flyback transformers in the
Yeah,
TVs,
right.
and
That's actually a Tesla transformer.
that high pitched whine.
Yeah, that's 15
the,
kilocycles.
that's the noise that I hear, and
Okay.
it's never until I get away from the cities, get away from the lines, get behind the mountains, then it starts to go away.
Yeah,
So it must be a relation with that.
yeah.
Okay. Alchemy.
That's not a subject that I'm an expert on, so
Okay.
I'll have to pass that one over.
Okay. Well, the other interesting thing was the 400, the 426 and 2/3, and the 432 hertz that has to do with music. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the original Pythagorean music system is based on a base 2 set of logarithms. So it's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, and all that. So C is supposed to be 256 cycles a second. And if you use the Pythagorean expansion to get all the notes in the scale, the what they call the fifths and the fourths and what have you, then A comes out to 426 and 2/3. So there's two carrier systems in a musical scale. One's called I have to go back to my notes on this, but one is A carrier and the other one is E carrier. So if you take the frequency E and you amplitude modulate it by 1/5 of its frequency, then that gives you 2 more notes, and that's one part of the scale. If you take the letter of the frequency A and you amplitude modulate it by 1/5 of its own frequency, then that produces another set of sidebands, and that gives you all the notes in the scale. So one group is all numbers that end in 00 or whatever. There's no fractional element. The other group is fractional and has thirds. So the 256 is on the one that doesn't have the thirds. I'd have to pull out my notes and give the exact frequencies. The other group all has thirds, where the second harmonic is C, which is 512, is actually 511 and 3/3. And then A, which is one step down, is 4/26 and 2/3, and then the next note, right now I can't remember off the top of my head, but that one is 1/3. So that's where the 4/26 comes from. It's derivable from the Pythagorean number sequence, which is the powers of 2.
Okay. So with the altering or the changing of this, what are they doing?
Well, what happened is when polyphony came about, and you had to start playing different melodies on top of each other and get them to fit. And when music first got digitized by the keyboard, the Pythagorean method doesn't work anymore, because as the piece of music moves around, the coordinate system starts to shift and the notes don't line up, and it sounds like hell. So when you have a linear instrument like a violin or the human voice or something like that, it can stay in phase with the distortion in the coordinate system. But as soon as you digitize it with the keyboard, that you have to have one set of notes going up different than the set of notes going down. You get a hysteresis loop. And so what they did is they came up with a different type of pattern. I think it was called just intonation, where they moved the frequencies around a little bit. They didn't particularly sound too good, and you didn't get a perfect stable waveform, but it was acceptable. And then that's when the frequencies changed to 432. And then apparently it was the Nazis or something around related to that element in history where, but this is typical of the Europeans. That's how they ended up with 50 cycles per second, is their obsession towards this metric deal. So they made it 440. And the Pythagorean concept of music is numerological. Numbers are what's important. So even though you go, well, what's the difference? The ratios are all the same. If you keep all the same ratios, you go from 256 to 260, it's the same. Well, not from the Pythagorean viewpoint, it's not. The numerology doesn't work out. Anybody from Bach's time before would realize that we're dealing with numerological elements, which people often wrongly refer to as frequencies. They're numbers, and then they don't fit into the cosmos, and the music is not part of what's going on, because all music from Bach's time prior was all based on cosmic type of conditions, usually with relation to God. And then when we entered the world of Beethoven, then we entered the world of music, which is ego and and psychological, personal, humanistic type stuff. At that point it separated from God and became what the technical term for it is called romantic music. And as the romanticism got more and more intense, then we were led to things like fascism and communism and Nazism, which just were out of control romanticism. And now there is no more music. Now it's just
so
noise.
It's sort of changing our realism of what should be or what is natural, and by altering and changing that, then they can influence with their ideas. We're not based, we're not founded,
well, that's what seems to be going. I mean, basically, you can go all the way back, to the time of Pythagoras, and this music was not meant to be entertainment. It was an engineering type thing. Music made things happen. It made people do things. There was a whole set of musical scales that there wasn't just the two that we have now, major and minor. And each one of those scales had a profound influence on human behavior. So you could say that to make somebody do something against their will or mind control or whatever, that's nothing new. But what's new or modern, so to speak, is separating these things from reality. So let's take my situation with this carrier telephone stuff and earth signals and all that. It used to be you could go to a payphone in some remote location out in the desert, and and just dial one number to get rid of the dial tone, and you could hear the earthquake signals in the phone because it's the noise in the phone system. That's why using these old long distance phone lines, this Long Lines project, we're just listening to the noise, which now is the signal, if you see what I mean. Now, as we get away from AM radio, as we get away from carrier telephone, as we get more and more digital and more internet, and all these things start to become more and more, bounding, We are no longer connected to nature.
So the elimination of analog separates us
Separates
from
us from nature
Right,
because we don't have any it's not part of that anymore.
right. The rhythm's gone, everything's cubicle, everything's confined.
Yeah, it's not part of life.
You know, kind of a filtering out everything.
Yeah, well, actually, I've postulated that it's actually become an entity, the beast out of the Bible, and that the element of silicon is attempting to take over from carbon. I've come to the point, and more people are starting to agree with me on that, because there's something really insidious.
Do you think that silicon was a base many years ago? I've heard some of the discussion about some of the ancient trees were more silicon based than they were carbon based. Any relation
No,
to that?
I can't
Okay.
say definitely on that subject, but carbon has been the principal, foundation of life, and silicon is its mineral equivalent. So in a certain sense, you have two competing elements. And then it's an interesting irony that there's this rampage against carbon, global warming and all this stuff, which it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But why is there's all of a sudden there's this massive opposition to carbon? Why this silicon technology is starting to manipulate people's minds, and there's a malevolent intelligence in all of this digital stuff. And for somebody like me that's not digital, when I have to engage in this stuff, I can see this thing screwing around with me.
Yeah.
I can sense it. That it's and other people, when they're engaged in this technology, they're always angry with it, and it's creating a general anger. People are angry all the time now, constantly angry, and this technology is forcing that. And I think eventually it'll be like that movie, The Matrix, and it'll just get rid of us. And the people that are pandering this, that is their intent.
So when we have frequency, when we have analog, then what in relation to the Schumann resonance of the Earth? Are they trying to alter that too, you think?
Well, they, when we say they, who's they?
Right.
Right now, I say it. When it's trying to do it,
Okay.
that's the most important thing right now for everybody's psychology, is we go they this and they that. Well, who's they? Who's they? It's not they, it's it. It. The Schumann resonance thing, there's a lot of questions about that. I can't get anything concrete. It appears to me that it's more voodoo
Mm-hmm.
than it is anything to do with the Earth's frequency. When I do calculations on what kind of possible frequencies would you expect out of the Earth, that one doesn't seem to come up. It's been my determination with all my analysis of the Earth signals, even though I cut it off at about 200 cycles per second, that the spontaneous oscillating frequency of the Earth is 18 kilocycles. If it gets forced, it'll drop. And that's how the seismic warning thing works.
Oh.
Is that 18 kilocycles will start to get more and more sustained into an alternating current rather than an impulse current, and the frequency will drop. Where this comes from or whatever, I have no idea. There's a researcher that worked at Ames, NASA Ames, and I had friends there and was interacting with those people, and he's developed in his laboratory the complete physical verification that earthquakes are an electrical phenomena. This guy's a big shot, and he gets nowhere with it. Absolutely nowhere. It's when he came here to Nevada and we compared our notes and all that, and his theory and my practice, and everything matched together perfectly. This guy they should be handing him $1 million bills.
Yeah. Well, I noticed I had bought an ELF receiver several years ago. It was a small kit. I put it together and I went up into the Coeur d'Alene forest, and I did what they talked about, putting the ground and the ground rod in and putting the headphones on and putting up the antenna.
Yeah.
And I noticed the first thing is that an insect flew by,
You could hear it.
and I actually heard the static being generated by the wings.
I know. I get that in my car all the time when
Yeah.
I'm parked listening to these things. I can hear the mosquitoes and
Yes.
the bugs.
It was like I was listening to nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was it electrostatic or?
Electrostatic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the Earth makes its own signals,
Hmm.
but it doesn't do it all the time. But when it gets going, it can make some wild sounds.
Yeah. So lightning strikes, and so on an ELF receiver, then, is there the potential of getting something that may indicate a earthquake? Or
Yeah, well, actually, you can just use an AM radio and tune it down to the bottom of the band if you get away from the interference, because that thing will be just roaring away before an earthquake. But that could be a hurricane or a tornado.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, it's just one point measurement. But when you get a broader spectrum, and you have a way to separate what is making that signal, and you develop that kind of experience, then it's engineerable. Then you can put something together, and you definitely have an earthquake forecasting system. And there's a couple of other methods that were developed out of Stanford University in association with people that I just talked about. It's called the magnetometer method. The only problem with the magnetometer method is it starts to indicate like 3 or 4 months before, where my system is more like 2 days. So between the two of them, then you pretty much got it. And then you can take it from that, and you can do the HF with the ionosphere, because there's currents of multiple millions of amps flowing in the earth around the time of an earthquake, and it sets up a reciprocal current in the ionosphere, and it actually affects ionospheric propagation too. So if you have a complete HF, medium frequency, low frequency, very low frequency, and extremely low frequency facility like I had at Landers, and direct DC measurement, magnetometers and electrostatic probes, it's clearer than hell that when there's going to be an earthquake, all that stuff's going to go nuts at the same time, and you could feel quite confident in saying, okay, we've got 24 hours or less.
Are those bands still used for subcommunication, submarines?
Yeah, 25 kilocycles, and I think there's another one down on 20. They're pretty strong interference, and that's one of the things that makes it so people can't pick this stuff up, because you have to filter it out. It's so strong that the 25 kilocycles will go through your sound system, but you can't hear it. But your dog will be going insane, and it'll burn your speakers out.
Yeah. Huh. You had mentioned about the ionosphere, or at least so the sunspot cycles. Now, there's a lot of talk that the next couple of winters we're going to get, when I was up in Coeur d'Alene, that they're going to get record-breaking snow. And I know that you've been monitoring and watching the sun
Yeah,
cycles.
we're at the minimum right now.
Okay.
And that tends to, but it's hard to say, because I've been studying this on a daily basis since 1978. I don't have big facility now, to be on top of it. The government, they don't give you the information anymore. It's all, even trying to get a weather forecast anymore, all those services have been pulled. So I can't say exactly what's going on now, but people that have looked at the sun and told me where the sunspots are at, it looks like the news cycle is starting to show itself. When I'm out, I record the solar flux every day and log it. It's been pretty much steady straight line at 67. So this was predicted to be one of the dimmest solar minimums ever. Didn't quite make that. So the last minimum, which would be about 11 years ago or so, that's when I had my facility. The solar flux went down to the lowest I ever recorded. It went down to like 58. So we're at the minimum, but these minimums, like the one minimum occurred in 75, 76, is record cold everywhere and drought all over the place. And it's that's what we've been going through with this minimum, is a lot of drought in this area. There's always a balance. So if it's too cold here, it's got to be too warm somewhere else. You see what I mean? That there's a conserved energy involved, that there has to be an average, a mean temperature, as they call it. So I can only speak for, where I analyze, which is, the Pacific Northwest and Southern California and then Central and all that. So that seems to have been the case, is bad drought. And then it's been pretty cold, but the drought broke. But the solar flux didn't go up. So this weather cycle and solar cycle are not phased with each other like they have been in others. So that's what makes it hard to say this is doing this and this is doing that, because they don't really, there's so many other variables involved that you can't just say that it's going to do this or that. But that would be consistent more snow, cold, whatever, with a solar minimum. That would be consistent. And then when the sun flares like crazy and it warms up, then Chicken Little runs around and screams global warming. Yet when this mini ice age occurred in the middle of the 70s, when I first started studying this stuff, Chicken Little was running around saying the ice age. But they just make this stuff up so that they can look like big shots and make money out of it.
Yeah, I was in Pennsylvania in '76, and I remember New York and Buffalo. They were just completely some of the worst snow that they've ever had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Electrical sensitivity to electromagnetism or any of the others. There was a gentleman that you had that did some work for to try and find out why he was sick all the time.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about all that?
Well, that was a fascinating experience, and I learned quite a bit. So, what happened is I was kind of a refugee. My installation in Bolinas had been freshly destroyed, and I was just floating around, and I was in the vicinity of where this guy had his factory that he made these tools. I was living in the redwoods on the other side of the hill, and somebody had contacted me and say, there's a guy that wants to talk to you. He's getting sick from the power lines. And I go, yeah, right. But at any rate, I wasn't in a situation to be picky. If there was anything that was going to be an income or help me get back on my feet again. So I went over there, and he told me that he had paid the power company $450,000 to put the substation feeders that went past his building underground, because he was convinced, and they convinced him, whatever, well, if we put the things underground, then you won't be in the field. Well, it made it worse. And he lost $450 million, and the power company was wigging out. So that seems to be my voodoo in life. I'm like an exorcist or whatever, and these things will happen, and then all of a sudden, there I am. So it was $100 an hour, just a couple hours a day. So I started analyzing his situation, and his description of his symptoms were consistent with things that I knew that these fields would do. So I did some tests on him to see if he was really sensitive to 60 cycle type electromagnetic actually is not a good word for that, but magnetic time varying magnetic fields, and he was sensitive to them. He was sensitive to microwaves in a degree that would defy any explanation of how he could be so sensitive to such a very, very low quantity of power, but he was. And the reason he was sensitive to all these things is because his body was so out of balance. He had gotten his body completely unbalanced, and that caused all these symptoms. And when I started analyzing what all these different things were that were affecting him, that was quite an education for me. I didn't quite realize how bad the interference was, what the engineering practices that the power companies were engaging in that were changing from this delta Y that was generating it, when they made it so you didn't have to have a license to operate an AM radio station anymore as far as engineers and all that. They just started hiring yahoos, and all these transients started spreading out through all the telephone cables in that part of the Bay Area, and then the rampant silly phone and pager towers, and each one of these things produced an identifiable and duplicable symptom in this character.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think under the instigation of the cellular telephone companies, they had his employees start, harassing me and vandalizing my car and all that. And so I had to drive off to the sunset. But I would come back on a yearly basis, and check up on him. And he was quite an experimenter, and he was always fooling around with ways to try to neutralize, the waves and all that. And I would advise him, and that he would hand me a $100 bill, which was very welcome for a destitute person living in his car in the bushes.
So the symptoms that he was dealing with was a loss of sleep and sickness and depression.
What the power line interference caused rheumatic pains. The severe transients coming from the digitally modulated AM transmitter and improper grounding, which propagated it through all the telephone cables and power lines in that city. That was causing this heavy anxiety condition. The silly phones were burning his face. And all those symptoms are consistent to what I would expect and what, would be other people have observed in fooling around with that kind of stuff. Myself, I know when I used to have a diet, that wasn't as good as I have now. I was too heavy on the chocolate and coffee and that kind of stuff. Anytime there'd be a magnetic storm on the planet, I would have heavy rheumatic pains in my shoulders. So the power line magnetism, he feels rheumatic pains. That made sense to me. And I'd put up coils around him and I'd say, do you feel this? And it wouldn't be plugged into anything, and he didn't feel it. And I go, do you feel it now? And he wouldn't feel anything. And then I'd fool around and I'd go, you feel it? And then no. And then, then I'd sneak some current in and they go, oh yeah, I can feel that. The AM radio stuff, that seemed to be more of affecting the nerves because of the violent transients that were produced by the digital waveform that wasn't properly filtered before it went in the modulator. So this thing was running like a giant Navy radar transmitter. It's wiping out the whole AM band all around it, but there's no law anymore. You don't have to be a licensed engineer. You can just hire any Yahoo. All the equipment's all digital. No one knows about filtering any of that stuff because this physics viewpoint of electricity is so shallow and narrow that that's why we're getting all these parasitic oscillations and all the equipment, because the way I say it metaphorically, Einstein says there's no electricity. So if there's no electricity, why engineer for it? It's just all electrons.
Was this before Wi-Fi? Did he have Wi-Fi there? How long ago was
This was 1991 maybe, or two. The digital thing really hadn't grabbed hold yet. Just starting to get a hold.
So when you say microwave from the local towers that were transponders, or what do you think that?
Well, in his case, it was the pagers and cellular telephone.
Okay. And this was around the San Francisco area, you said?
Yeah, this was in what they've referred to as Silicon. There's Redwood City.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
He had a company that made all the chain hoists and line tension equipment for the power companies and the phone companies. So it's pretty well established, but he was getting worse and worse. He couldn't work in his building. He's either going to have to move the whole operation or figure out a way to abate it, and he lost quite a bit of money on something that didn't work. If he would have known about me beforehand, maybe I could have saved him $450,000.
Have you run into anyone else since then as bad as him, or?
No. And I did experiments when I was in high school that demonstrated that these particular flux densities of these frequencies are biologically, they cause biological changes. So there was an incident where this was back in, I think, around 1967, 1968, where the American embassy in Moscow, people were getting sick there from something. And they tracked it down to somewhere around 400 megacycle carrier that was being transmitted into the building. And it was thought, it came out, the radio waves, whatever, they were trying to make them sick. Well, actually, what they were doing is exciting the inside of the building with this carrier, and then listening to the reflected signal, putting it into a phase demodulator, and they could hear what people were saying inside. It wasn't they were trying to cook them with microwaves, even though that's not microwaves, but they were trying to use this radio sounding thing to eavesdrop on the communication. So the woman that ran the science department in high school knew that I had a Bell System TD2 microwave transmitter, and this came out in Science Magazine, or some magazine that these scientists and teachers went to subscribe to. They did experiments with energy in the what's called the 10 centimeter band. That's around 3,000 megacycles, and they got biological mutation. And she goes, I want you to duplicate this. We'll set you up with a lab. You have your own lab, isolated, locked door and the whole thing. You set your whole thing up, and my one of my best buddies, he was studying to be a biologist, so him and myself were commissioned. We exposed radish seeds. We put them in the waveguide of the TD2 transmitter and the termination, the dummy load type thing. The seeds were probably, the transmitter is only a watt, and the seeds, because of their aperture, maybe 10 milliwatts at the most. It's hard to say. It's very difficult to calculate, but just off the top of my head, 10 milliwatts, 15-minute exposure. The seeds were planted next to a control that was put into the same situation with the same temperature and environment, except there was no radio frequency power applied. The exposed seeds germinated faster. They germinated more efficiently. They grew 3 times as fast to 1/3 the height. So there was a profound effect on the seeds from just a very brief exposure, which is now a thing that people have stuck to the side of their face in all their waking hours.
Yeah, teenagers unfortunately have even fallen asleep with their phones underneath their pillows.
Yeah.
So with that, with cyclotronics and some of the stuff that has been talked about, what is your thought? What do you know? What would you like to add to any of that?
I don't think I have anything to really add on that. That's kind of out of my, even though I was a frequent speaker at the Psychotronics Associations and all that, but they were more interested in the healing stuff, like the Lukoski oscillator, the Ruth Drown, radionics, numerological radionics type stuff, and what have you. I learned a lot, and that came out of because I inherited I was followed in the footsteps of engineering the Integratron, this kind of extraterrestrial project in Southern California. So everybody was all, enamored to that thing. So when I showed up, I just fell right into place. Mainly because of all the knowledge I had on Tesla and and types of electricity that are not acknowledged or not known about.
So some of the experiments that you're doing here, does that involve what you would call free energy or free electricity?
No.
Okay. But you have been involved in that in the past.
Yeah, I've involved myself in that, and basically it's a whole thing's a dog and pony show in its entirety. There's a couple things I've seen that exhibited efficiencies of over 100%. I came up with a theoretical basis and the necessary experiments to go with them, and nobody's interested in that because they've all got their dog and pony show, and they've been wrapped up in this stuff for over 30 years. Bedini's gone now. His dog and pony show is expended. Even the people that supported him and whatever, and published him and whatever, realized there was nothing there. So what I've done is I've just said, that's it. I'm no more free energy. There is nothing. Nothing's free in the free world. Yeah. And that's that. And then the way I look at it, from the energy gluttonry, from the 6-wheel pickup trucks to whatever, that this lust for energy, if there was a way to extract that from the environment, let's say gravity or something like that, what would happen to the Earth? It might go flying into the sun. This is the Rudolf Steiner and his followers. When the electrical age began, and they were philosophers in that era, they were terrified that electricity was going to destroy the Earth. So there's this free energy and Tesla's transmission and all that stuff. That's a two-edged sword. To do Tesla's wireless transmission through the Earth today, with the amount of energy that people demand and the overpopulation and all of that, it could only cause bad things to happen. So in a certain sense, that there's kind of a karmic opposition that Tesla faced with these type of things. In Tesla's day, the electrical load was a 50 candle power Edison incandescent lamp.
Yeah. And
there was only 10% of the people, on the Earth that there is now. So back then, it made sense, conceivably, but but then it's a radio interference type thing. The power lines work very well. There's no reason not to use them. There's all this thing, well, the power lines produce this and that. I don't see any evidence of all of this this hysteria about power lines are bad for you. I watch generation after generation of Blackbirds, you know, on all the 12 kV power lines and 4 kV power lines, and I don't see any complications with them. What I do is the Blackbirds that eat, you know, around the garbage cans at McDonald's and all those places, they're all deformed. You know, their beaks are twisted, and their claws, you know, their claws are all distorted, and their feathers are all screwy. And but the ones that hang out on the power lines don't have that problem. So what is really bad for people and what's not? There's a lot more to this than, oh yeah, it's a power lines, power lines. But as long as that's a delta connected system, the electromagnetic boundary condition keeps the energy in the space between the wires, and as long as nothing blocks that, as long as the bird doesn't get from line to line and cause a reflection, there's no problem for the bird. Now, if the potential gets to the point where, you know, it starts to cause electrostatic repulsion, you won't find a bird that will land on a power line much higher than 12,000 volts, because then they get sparks to their feet and it ruffles their feathers. Now, you take the modern way of the power lines being hooked up, where you have all these harmonics and you have a neutral that's in another place on the pole outside of that electromagnetic boundary condition, and it's grounded all over the place, then you no longer have an electromagnetic boundary condition. Then the electricity is loose, and it is no longer a sine wave, and it's no longer 60 cycles. Then you're going to have problems.
Yeah. Well, with that said, as we close out here, with all of the cell towers, transmission lines, we were talking about the dangers on deck when you were in the Navy from the radar. So you feel very strongly too, with everything that's been assembled around us, the cell phones, that just how dirty and how dangerous they are to human tissue and to our health.
Yeah, I mean, I did the experiments, and later later on in adult life, I had some guy wanted to do it to his marijuana seeds. And I go, okay, well, let's set up a little oscillator, you know, something a lot less complicated than a whole rack full of, you know, Western Electric TD2 equipment. Just a little self-oscillating tube, and we put the things in there and did the exact same thing. Exact same thing as it did with the radish seeds.
So again, with this 5G that's coming, or so it's not everywhere yet, but eventually they say it's going to be here, that puts us in an environment of extinction. Do you think that is possibly what they're doing, or they, or it?
It's hard to say.
It's insanity, right?
That's what people say. They go, well, why would the power company do all this stuff? There's got to be money in it. Well, there is money. It's the money that's going the wrong way. I see totally stable, legitimate delta connected power systems. Let's take example of the city of Sacramento, which is a public owned utility. Used to be the standard voltage, PG&E and everybody else is 12,470 delta. This is called 12 kV. Mm-hmm. They are going through and replacing every transformer. They're running a thick neutral all throughout the whole thing. They have to replace all the transformers. They have to put a neutral wire in. That's one more wire out of 3 of all that expense. That's costing them millions and millions of dollars for downgraded performance. Somebody's forcing them to do it. So it's not to save money, even though there was, when you went to delta to Y, it was because when you do that, you can use the same transformers, but you can get almost double the power through the system. But they're not doubling, the voltage is not going up, it's a retrograde Y, the voltage is going down, and they have to buy all new transformers. So I tell people that, and even like engineers and what have you, they're going, there's something fishy here. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of it without, all of a sudden becoming an enemy of the people that I have to rely upon, to support me.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance,
Sure.
so I can't, create too many waves, or I'll end up dead. And then I rely on, I'm associated with a number of utility companies. They're my patrons, as far as providing me with what I got, getting me in here and providing places to live out in the field, because I'm, like a ranger engineer. They love to have that out there. To have somebody out there with the stuff in their car knows when something's taking a bite, and I can warn them beforehand or track it right down. So this is what I'm trying to engage in now for my next presentation, is actually to come up with something that's pretty straight, non-conspiratorial, no lizard jokes or foul language or whatever, and just try to make a straight engineer's package that the utility companies themselves that aren't doing this, or are just starting to do it, can see what problems they're going to face. So that's what I've been commissioned to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I pushed it off for a long time, and there's a lot of demands on me for that. And I promised, because there are engineers that are waiting for me to complete this, because they want to see what's going on with this.
Right.
Here in Nevada, it's a rampant program with NV Energy. Is just to strip they will not, even though I pay for a Delta service, they will not provide me with an upgraded one. It's like there's an obsession against Delta power connections. So consequently, if somebody wants to start up a business here in this town, small little industrial or car repair type thing or whatever, and they need three-phase power, NV Energy will no longer give them 240 volts three-phase.
What is the voltage then that they get?
208.
208.
Yeah.
Strictly 208.
Yeah, and that requires more copper.
Yeah.
Then you have to get transformers to step it from 208 auto transformers to bring it back up to 240. There's no electricians around that know how to do that type of stuff. You got to use one size bigger wire. You got to use one size bigger pipe. If it's for the 3 wires, and then you got to run a neutral. Now you got to use twice the size of pipe, and you got a 4th wire.
So yeah, it's the installs I did years ago. If someone had 245, there was not going to be any problem. When they had 208, I could never get enough wattage out of the equipment.
Right.
Because the primary wasn't sufficient.
Yeah, you have to boost it.
Yeah, I had to boost
And then when you do that, you have to remember that when you go from 240 down to the 208, going the other direction, the current goes up proportionately.
it. Right. Yeah,
So your losses go up.
We use buck boost type
Yeah,
transformers.
right.
Well, as I close out, is there anything you'd like to say as we go here?
No, I think we covered broad spectrum.
Yeah, I definitely want to thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I'd like to take a look around before I go too.
Yeah.
That AM transmitter that you have over there, the broadcast,
Yeah?
that's quite a gem you have. So I want to take
Oh,
a
yeah,
look
those
at
are
that.
beauties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you very much.
Okay, welcome.
All right.